Iron gray water, a single loon crossing it without a sound. The camera lifts across the surface of a lake in northern Wisconsin, past the pines standing black against a low October sky, until it finds a white cottage with a stone chimney too tall for the roof it belongs to. Smoke does not rise from either flue. No car sits in the drive. And yet the porch steps have been swept, and three fresh marigolds bloom in a clay pot on the rail out of season, as though someone still expects a knock at the door. Inside, on a pine table by the back window, 20 hand-carved wooden spoons lie in a row on unbleached linen. Each one marks a birthday. The last one is finished so recently the oil has not yet dried. A young woman stands in the doorway. Her hand is shaking. Somewhere on gravel. Tires slow. $9. That was what Meredith Osterberg had left in the world when she walked out of the Duluth bus station on the coldest Friday of October. $9 and a folded page of phone numbers no one ever answered. 3 weeks. That was how long she had been sleeping upright on a bench in the north corner of the terminal, near the vending machines that hummed all night and drowned out the sound of her own breathing. 3 weeks since she had aged out of the extended foster care system. 3 weeks since a caseworker had handed her a manila folder, a bus voucher, and a handshake that ended before either of them had to look at each other for too long. She had learned early that certain goodbyes came with paperwork. She was 20 years old, 20, which meant she was legally not a child anymore, and legally not anyone's responsibility, and legally allowed to walk into any diner in the city and sit down for as long as she could nurse a small coffee, which she had, for most of the second week, until the manager at the third diner had stopped refilling her cup and asked, kindly enough, if she had somewhere to be. She hadn't. She still didn't. Meredith walked the 4 blocks between the bus station and the library because the library was warm and free and had a bathroom where she could rinse her face without anyone commenting. She counted the blocks the way she counted everything now. 3 cracks in the sidewalk between Superior Street and the crosswalk. 2 traffic lights. 47 steps from the last light to the library entrance if she stayed on the outside of the curb. She counted because counting was the only thing that felt like it belonged to her. Growing up in 7 different foster homes had taught her 3 things: how to fit her entire life into one nylon backpack, how to sleep sitting up, and how to stop hoping someone was coming. There had been a girl at foster home number 4 in Green Bay. When Meredith was 7, that girl had cried every night at the same time, 10 past 8, because her mother had told her she was coming on a Tuesday, and Tuesdays kept passing, and no mother came. Meredith had watched that girl for 11 months. Then she had made herself a promise. She would never be that girl. She would never wait. If someone wanted her, they would find her, and no one had. So she had stopped listening for the sound of a door. At 16, she had learned to sew because the last foster mother had a broken sewing machine in the basement and no one to fix it. At 17, she had learned to change the oil on an old Buick. At 18, she had signed her own release form. At 19, she had spent 1 full year in a group home for older youth on 5th Avenue, sharing a bunk with a girl who talked in her sleep about someone named Delilah. At 20, she had received her final packet. The final packet was thin: a birth certificate, a social security card, the name of a caseworker who would not return calls after 2 weeks, a pamphlet titled "You and Your New Adult Life," and a bus voucher good for one-way trip within the state. Meredith had used the voucher to ride from the group home to the terminal, and then she had run out of forward motion, so she counted sidewalks. That Friday, she had 11 cracks between her feet and the library door when a man in a gray parka called her name. Not her first name, her whole name, the way a doctor might call it in a waiting room, the way no one had called it in years. Miss Osterberg. She turned before she meant to. That was the trouble with a name. It could still catch you even after you had trained yourself not to answer. The man was thin and pale and held a manila envelope against his chest with both hands, the way people carry something they are afraid to drop. He wore glasses that had slid down his nose, and he did not push them back up. He looked as though he had been waiting for her for a very long time and was surprised to be finished waiting. "My name is Perry Whitmore. I'm an attorney. I've been trying to reach you for 6 days." Meredith did not answer. She had learned, at some point between foster home 4 and foster home 5, that when an adult said your name in a formal way, the safest response was silence. Silence never got you in trouble. Silence never gave anything away. Silence was the one thing that belonged only to you. Perry Whitmore held out the envelope. I was told the shelter on 3rd gave you a bed on Wednesday. I've been standing out here since 11 this morning. I'm sorry to catch you on the street. She took the envelope because her hands moved before her brain did. It was heavier than an envelope should be. She could feel something metal shifting inside. There's a key, and an address, and a note from me on the back of my card. If you have somewhere quiet to open it, I would rather you read it sitting down. Then he tipped his head, turned, walked back to a small brown sedan parked at the meter behind her. She watched him go without moving. Somewhere quiet. As though the word quiet belonged to a person like her. As though she owned an armchair or a warm kitchen or a corner where she could sit with something heavy in her lap and no one asking her to leave. She walked the 47 steps to the library. She sat in the back reading room, the one with the green shaded lamps, and she opened the envelope on her knees so no one could see what she was doing. The key came out first. Brass, old. The kind of key that opened an old lock, small enough to fit inside her closed fist. Then a folded page with an address written in careful, slanted handwriting. County Road Q, Lake Nicollet, Wisconsin. Then the card. The card was cream-colored and said Perry Whitmore, attorney at law, and on the back, written by hand in the same slanted script, was one sentence. Your uncle left one thing for you. Please come. Meredith read the sentence 3 times before her brain agreed to translate it. Your uncle. She did not have an uncle. Her mother had been an only child. Her father had been an only child. That was the one thing she knew about her parents because it was the one thing that had made her situation permanent. There had been no one. That was why she had gone into the system at 4. That was why she had stayed for 16 years. That was why no one had ever come. She looked at the card again. She looked at the key. The key was cold in her palm, and it did not care what she thought was true. She rode the last bus back to the shelter that night, and she did not sleep. She lay on the top bunk with her backpack under her head, and she watched the ceiling fan turn slow and steady above her. She counted the fan blades. 4. She counted the number of times each blade passed her line of sight in 1 minute. 60. She counted the number of hours until morning. 7. Then she got up, before the 7th hour was finished, and she walked back to the bus station in the dark. She spent $7 of her $9 on a one-way ticket north. The bus left at 6:14 on Saturday morning. The seat next to her stayed empty for the entire ride. She rested her forehead against the cold window and watched the city fall away. Then the suburbs. Then the small mill towns with their brick smokestacks. Then the tree line, pine after pine after pine, rolling out flat and heavy under a low gray sky. She had never been this far north. She had barely been north at all. She had spent her whole life inside a 50-mile radius of a city that had never given her a single thing that stayed. Now she was moving. And she did not know if she was moving towards something or just away. The bus dropped her at a shelter of a stop in a town called Mercer Landing. Population 209. According to the wooden sign, there was a diner, a gas station, a bait shop, a single traffic light that swung on a cable above the intersection and blinked yellow because there was nothing to stop for. She stood on the curb with her nylon backpack. She did not know where to go next. A pickup truck slowed and rolled down its window. The driver was a woman with a red flannel jacket and hair pulled back under a wool cap and skin weathered by a lot of years outside. She looked at Meredith. She looked at the address on the folded paper Meredith held up without speaking. County Road Q, the Osterberg place. Meredith nodded because a nod cost nothing. Get in. I'm going that way. The truck smelled like coffee and diesel and the faint sweetness of pine sap. The woman did not ask questions. She drove. 12 minutes along a 2-lane road that curved beside the lake. The lake was long and dark and quiet, and its surface was scattered with the last golden leaves of the year. There were no other cars. You family. Meredith thought about the answer for a long time. I don't know yet. A glance across the cab. No press. Just the small, slow, complete nod that people up here seem to save for exactly the moments a stranger did not know what to say. The truck stopped at a narrow gravel driveway that disappeared into the pines. That's it. White cottage, stone chimney. You'll see it from the drive. Meredith stepped down. The woman watched her for a beat longer than felt necessary. Then, quietly, "The way you say something you have been sitting on all the way from town." 3 words she did not think to explain. "He was a good man." And she drove off before Meredith could ask which man. Meredith stood at the top of the driveway with her backpack on one shoulder and the brass key in her fist, and she listened. The lake made no sound. The pines made no sound. Somewhere far off, a single crow called once and did not call again. She walked down the driveway. The cottage was smaller than she had pictured and larger than she had feared. 2 stories. White clapboard weathered gray by weather. A wide front porch that leaned a hair to the left. And rising up along the north wall, a chimney of stacked river stone that climbed past the second-story roofline like something that had been built to outlast the house itself. The stones were mismatched. Some pale, some rust-colored, some almost black. They had been chosen one at a time. She could tell, by someone who had walked the shore of the lake, picking each one up and turning it in his hands and setting it down again if it did not feel right. Someone had built this chimney with his own 2 hands. She did not know how she knew that. She just knew. Behind the cottage, at the edge of the water, sat a small boathouse of the same weathered white, its wide door closed and padlocked, its own smaller chimney puffing no smoke. There was no car in the driveway. There was no smoke from either chimney. There was no sign that anyone had lived here in weeks. And yet, the porch steps had been swept. The leaves that should have been ankle-deep had been raked into a tidy pile at the corner of the yard. A single rocking chair on the porch sat exactly perpendicular to the front door, as though someone had straightened it that very morning. And on the porch rail, resting on a folded dishcloth, sat a small clay pot with 3 fresh marigolds still blooming out of season. Someone had been here. Someone was still coming. Meredith stood at the foot of the porch steps for a very long time. Then she climbed them. The key slid into the lock and turned as though it had been oiled the day before. The door opened without a sound. She stepped inside. The first thing she noticed was the smell. Not dust, not mothballs, not the abandoned smell of a house shut up too long. Cedar and wood smoke, and something faintly like fresh bread, though there was no bread on the counter. The second thing she noticed was the light. The curtains had been pulled open, all of them, as though whoever had been here last had wanted the next person to walk into a house full of afternoon sun. She set down her backpack. She did not close the door behind her. Some part of her still needed the option of running. The living room opened to her left. A stone fireplace on the north wall, its hearth swept, its mantel bare except for a single cream envelope, propped against a small brass box. A worn leather armchair angled toward the fire. A pair of reading glasses folded neatly on the arm of the chair. A blanket, dark green wool, folded on the sofa the way her most careful foster mother used to fold blankets, with the corners meeting exactly. The kitchen was straight ahead through a low doorway. She walked to it slowly. The counter was clean. The sink was empty. The refrigerator hummed low and steady. A yellow notepad was stuck to its door with a small magnet shaped like a lighthouse. The magnet had been through a lot of years. The paint on the roof of the lighthouse had chipped away. The note was written in ballpoint pen. Careful capital letters. Fresh groceries every Friday. Don't forget the butter. Francis. Meredith read it twice. Francis. Whoever had been feeding this house had signed her name the way people sign their names when they intend to be back. She opened the refrigerator. Half-gallon of milk. Fresh. Dated Wednesday. A pound of butter still in its waxed paper. A carton of eggs. A small jar of raspberry jam with a handwritten label. A block of yellow cheese wrapped in cloth. A bowl of apples on the middle shelf. Someone had gone shopping for a house they did not live in. Someone had bought butter for a person who was not there. Meredith closed the refrigerator door and stepped back. Her hands were shaking. She did not know why. Because it wasn't the letter that undid her. It wasn't the address on the folded paper. It wasn't even the brass key. It was the butter. Butter meant someone believed a person was coming home to make toast. She turned in a slow circle in the middle of the kitchen, and she was about to walk back out to the living room when she saw the box. It sat on a small pine table in the alcove between the kitchen and the back window. The kind of table where a person might sit to peel potatoes or write a letter or watch the lake through the glass. On the table, at its center, was a wooden box, roughly the size of a shoebox, hinged, simply made, unlacquered pine. The lid had one word carved into its surface in small, careful letters: Meredith. She did not move. She stared at the box the way you stare at a photograph of yourself you do not remember being taken. Her name, carved into a piece of wood in a house she had never been to, in a state she had never visited, in a life she was supposed to be having by accident. She walked to the table. She sat down in the pine chair. The chair had been placed in front of the box as though someone had known she would need to be seated. She opened the lid. 20 wooden spoons lay inside. Not stacked, laid out in careful rows. Each one nestled in a soft bed of unbleached linen. Each one no longer than the length of her hand. They were smooth, hand-carved. The wood was pale in some, darker in others, cherry and maple and something reddish she did not know the name of. Each one had been oiled to a low, warm shine. She lifted the first spoon. The handle was thin, the bowl was shallow, more decorative than useful, and along the length of the handle, carved so small she had to lift the spoon toward the window to read it, was a date. October 14th, 2005, her first birthday. She was so still for so long that her own breathing sounded loud in her ears. She reached for the second spoon. October 14, 2006. Her second, the third. October 14, 2007. Her third. She laid them out on the linen in the order she pulled them. And by the fifth spoon, her hands were no longer steady. And by the eighth spoon, she had to stop and press both palms flat against the tabletop because the room had begun to tip forward. She was 4 years old when her parents died, which meant somebody had carved a spoon for her first birthday, and her second birthday, and her third birthday. Somebody had already been counting her years before her parents were even gone. She was crying. She realized it only when a tear landed on the back of her wrist, and she felt it, and it startled her. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her jacket the way she had wiped her face at every foster home she had ever lived in. Fast. Nobody's business. Then she kept going. October 14, 2009. Her fifth. October 14, 2010. Her sixth. The seventh spoon had a small crescent moon carved beside the date. She did not know why. The eighth had a tiny fish. The ninth had a leaf. So finely done she could count its veins. Somebody had been marking her birthdays with a design each year. Somebody had been telling her, in a language she could not read at the time, that they were still watching. She lifted the 10th, then the 11th, then the 12th. By the 15th she was not crying anymore because a body can only cry so much at once, and her body had switched over to something colder and more focused. Because if a spoon existed for every year of her life, then whoever had carved them had known when to stop, and whoever had carved them had known when to start. She reached for the last spoon, the 20th. She lifted it very carefully. October 14th, 2025, which was 3 weeks from tomorrow, which was the birthday she had not yet had. She stared at the date. She turned the spoon over in her hand. The wood was so pale it was almost white, fresh cut. The oil on it was still faintly tacky in one small spot along the underside of the handle, as though it had been finished so recently that the last coat had not fully cured. Whoever had carved this spoon had been alive very recently. Whoever had carved this spoon had been alive and thinking about her birthday, which was still 3 weeks away. She held the spoon flat across her palm. The lettering was slightly less steady than the others. The date was still legible, still perfectly readable, but the lines of the numbers wavered in a way the earlier ones did not, as though the hand that had held the carving knife had been tired, as though the hand had known it did not have long. He had carved her a spoon for a birthday he knew he would not live to see. He had marked her 20th, in advance, on purpose, as his last act. Meredith set the spoon down on the linen, very gently, as though it might crack. She sat back in the pine chair. She looked out through the back window at the lake. The water was flat and iron gray. A single loon crossed the surface far out, its head low, its wake almost invisible. The pines on the far shore stood black against the pale sky. One word out loud, to the empty room. Why? The house did not answer, but she was going to make it. She was going to find every answer this house had, and she was going to sit in this room with these 20 spoons in a row, and she was going to know who had loved her enough to keep a knife in his hand at 62 years old for a birthday he had not yet had. She stood up. Her legs were not entirely willing. She held the edge of the table for a moment. Then she walked, slowly, back through the low doorway and into the living room, and her eyes went straight to the mantel, the envelope. She had noticed it the first time she stepped inside. She had not been ready to touch it then. She thought she was ready now. The envelope was cream, thicker than a regular envelope, sealed with a small dab of red wax the color of a dried leaf. Across the front, in the same slanted, careful handwriting from Perry Whitmore's card, though a little older, a little more tired. One word: Meredith. She peeled the wax without breaking it. She unfolded the letter. 3 lines. Only 3. Meredith. Please don't rush. Some stories are supposed to open 1 page at a time. Someone will knock on this door tomorrow morning. Please trust her. She kept a promise when I no longer could. Uncle Emmett. She read it twice. Then again. Then a 4th time. Uncle Emmett. She had an uncle. His name had been Emmett Osterberg. He had been alive 3 weeks ago. He had carved her a spoon for a birthday he knew he would not see. And he had left her a house on a lake she had never been to, and a letter that told her to trust a woman she had never met. She sat down in the leather armchair by the fireplace because she needed to sit somewhere. The reading glasses were still folded on the arm of the chair. She did not move them. She stayed there a long time. The afternoon light shifted across the floor. The shadows of the pines outside stretched slowly across the hardwood, then across the braided rug, then up the far wall. A log settled in the cold grate with a soft crumble even though there was no fire. The refrigerator hummed on, then off, then on again. She should have been afraid. She was not afraid. She was something else, something she did not have a word for. Because for the first time in as long as she could remember, she was sitting in a room where the person who had left had wanted her to be the next one to sit down. Everything in this house had been set. The chair angled toward the fire, the glasses folded on its arm, the blanket cornered on the sofa, the marigolds on the porch rail, the butter in the refrigerator, the spoon carved in the final week of a dying man's life and laid in linen with 19 of its siblings. She had walked into a room that had been arranged for her, not for a stranger, not for a family lawyer, not for whoever might come, for her, Meredith, the girl with the name on the box. She lowered her face into her hands. She did not sob. She did not shake. She sat with her face in her hands, and she let one very quiet sound come out of her chest, and she did not try to hold it in this time. It was not the sound of grief. It was closer to the sound a person makes when they finally sit down after standing for so long they had forgotten what sitting felt like. When she finally lifted her head, the light in the room had gone a deeper gold. The far wall was orange. Late afternoon. She stood up, wiped her face on her sleeve, out of habit, walked to the bookshelf that ran along the wall opposite the fireplace, because she needed to know his face. The letter had said, Uncle Emmett. The spoons had said someone. The chair and the glasses had said someone who read. She wanted to know what he had looked like. The bookshelf held mostly hardcovers, novels, a whole shelf on carpentry, a row of fishing guides, a worn copy of a book about the ecology of northern Wisconsin lakes with a bookmark 2/3 of the way through, and on the top shelf, laid flat because they were too tall to stand, 4 large photo albums. She took down the newest looking one. She sat on the floor with her back against the sofa and she opened it in her lap. The photographs were unlabeled but arranged in careful chronological rhythm. A man in his 40s standing in front of this cottage, sleeves rolled up, holding a level against a partially finished chimney. The same man a few pages later, older, holding up a small pike he had caught, laughing at whoever held the camera. The same man at a church picnic. The same man behind a booth at what looked like a county fair. Always at a distance, always at the edge of the group, never in the middle of anything. I looked like a man who had spent a lot of years standing at the back of rooms. He had a kind mouth, a quiet face, deep lines around the eyes from squinting into the sun off water, hair that had once been brown, then salt and pepper, then almost entirely white by the last few pages. He wore the same brown canvas jacket in a lot of the pictures. It had a patch on the left elbow. She turned another page, then another. Then she stopped. She was looking at a photograph of the county fair, a Ferris wheel in the background, a crowd, Emmett Osterberg standing near a lemonade booth, 30 feet from the camera, half turned away, holding a paper cup he was not drinking from. He was not looking at whoever had taken the picture. He was looking off to the left, off into the crowd. Meredith followed his gaze. There, in the far left of the photograph, half hidden between two adults, was a little girl. She was maybe 9 years old. She was holding a blue balloon on a string. She was wearing a red corduroy jacket with white fake fur around the hood. Meredith knew that jacket. She had worn it for one entire winter when she was 9, at foster home number 5, in a town called Antigo. The foster mother had bought it at a thrift store because Meredith had outgrown her old coat. She had loved that jacket more than any piece of clothing she had ever owned. She had cried when she outgrew it. She had not known anyone had ever taken a picture of her in it. She had not known anyone had ever been at that fair. She lifted the album closer to her face. The photograph had been taken from behind a lemonade booth, at an angle no casual photographer would choose. The frame was not centered on the fair. It was centered on him, which meant somebody else had taken it, which meant somebody else had known he was there, which meant he had told them, which meant he had gone, on purpose, to that fair in Antigo, on a day when he had known she would be there. She turned the page. Another photograph. Different fair, different year, older her, maybe 11. She was in the background again, this time on the far right. She was licking a soft-serve ice cream cone. Emmett Osterberg stood at the edge of the frame with his back mostly to the camera, and yet his face was turned 3/4 of the way toward her. And even at that distance she could see it. The look of a man who was watching the one thing he had come to see. She turned another page. A school parking lot, a crowd of families in coats, graduation. She was 18 and she was standing at the back of a group of foster kids in a rented gown and a rented cap. Her cap had slid slightly sideways because she had not known how to pin it. He was on the far side of the parking lot. He was leaning against a red pickup truck. He was not talking to anyone. He was watching. He was watching her. Meredith closed the album very slowly. She placed it on the floor beside her. She placed both hands flat on the cover. One word out loud. To no one. How? Because how many birthdays, how many school concerts, how many afternoons had this man driven to some town she had been living in and stood at the back of some crowd and looked at her from a distance he was not allowed to cross? She counted, without meaning to, because counting was still the only thing that belonged to her. If he had started when she was 4, and he had died when she was almost 20, that almost 16 years. If he had come even twice a year, that was 30. If he had come more, that was more. She had spent 16 years believing no one was looking for her. She had been wrong. She had been so wrong that her wrongness had been the whole shape of her life. The refrigerator hummed on again. The light on the far wall had turned from orange to a deep rose. And that was when she heard it. 3 knocks. Soft, even, spaced. Not a stranger's knock. Not a delivery. Not the hard 3 raps of a man who wanted a door open right now. These were the knocks of a person who had been rehearsing the timing of her arrival for weeks. These were the knocks of someone who already knew the door would be answered. Meredith stood up. Her legs, this time, held. She walked across the living room, past the fireplace, past the mantel with the peeled wax seal, past her backpack on the floor by the front hall. She reached for the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. The letter had said, "Please trust her." She was not sure yet what her uncle's word was worth to her, because her uncle was 3 weeks in the ground and had never once, in 20 years of being her uncle, walked up to her at a fair and said her name. But he had carved her 20 spoons. I had bought her butter. He had straightened a rocking chair on a porch he knew she was coming to. She turned the knob. She opened the door. The woman on the porch was small and stood very still. She wore a long wool coat the color of oatmeal, a knitted scarf the pale gray of lake fog, and a hat that had been pushed back just enough that a fringe of white hair had escaped along her forehead. Her eyes were pale blue. Her hands, gloved in soft leather, were folded loosely at her waist in the practiced way of a woman who had spent decades holding herself steady beside beds where other people were breaking. She was probably in her middle 70s. She had the presence of a person who had waited outside a lot of doors in her life. And on the lapel of her coat, pinned near her collarbone, sat a small silver pin in the shape of a caduceus, the kind of pin nurses receive when they retire, the kind of pin women wear their whole lives afterward because being useful once has never stopped mattering. Her eyes met Meredith's. No first word, only a long look. And what came over her face was not surprise. It was not curiosity. It was not even relief. It was recognition. As though she had known this face already, as though she had been looking at photographs of it for a very long time, and had memorized it from a distance, and was only, finally, catching up in person to a girl she already knew. One gloved hand lifted, very slightly, not to touch, only to rest against her own chest. The words came softly. "So, you came." Then the voice caught, a small recovery, a careful smile, the kind a woman teaches herself over a lifetime of hard rooms. "My name is Frances Doolittle. I lived next door to your uncle for 31 years, and I have been keeping his kitchen for the last 3 weeks, because he asked me to." Her other hand came up, a covered dish, still warm, wrapped in a folded blue cloth. "I made you a chicken pie, because I figured you probably had not eaten today." Meredith stood in the open doorway with the last light of the afternoon falling across her feet, and the smell of cedar and wood smoke behind her, and the smell of a warm chicken pie in front of her. And she looked at this old woman she had never seen before in her life, and this old woman looked back. And Meredith understood, in the space of one breath, that whatever was about to happen next in this house had already been arranged. Not by her, and not by chance, but by a man she had never met, who had spent his whole life quietly making sure this one door would be answered by this one woman on this one afternoon. Frances took a small step forward. She did not cross the threshold. She waited. She was waiting to be invited in. The way a nurse waits at the door of a room where somebody has finally decided to speak. Meredith stepped back. She opened the door wider. One word left in her chest. "Please." And Frances Doolittle, who had kept a promise for longer than Meredith had been alive, stepped quietly into the little cottage on Lake Nicolay, carrying a warm dish in her hands and a story on her shoulders, and the door closed softly behind them both. Frances did not sit down right away. She stepped into the front hall and stood there for a long moment with the covered dish still in her hands, and her eyes moved slowly across the room the way a person looks at a place they have already said goodbye to more than once. The armchair, the mantel, the empty grate, the reading glasses folded on the arm of the chair where Emmett had left them the last night he had been able to sit up on his own. She did not touch anything. She only looked. Then she carried the pie to the kitchen without being asked, because she knew where the kitchen was, and she knew which counter had the trivet on it, and she knew which drawer held the potholders. And Meredith stood in the doorway and watched a stranger move through her uncle's house, like a woman moving through the rooms of her own life. The pie went down. The blue cloth got folded in 3 neat squares and placed on top of it. Frances turned back to Meredith. "There is a fire laid in the grate. Emmett laid it himself the last afternoon he was strong enough. He said whoever came into this house next was going to want a fire before anything else." A pause, the voice softened. "I have been leaving it alone. I did not want to be the one to light it." Meredith looked over her shoulder at the fireplace. The kindling was arranged in the small cross shape her uncle had used. Split cedar, a tight nest of birch bark, 3 larger logs stacked above, everything ready, everything waiting. She walked to the hearth. She took the long fireplace match from its box on the mantel. She struck it once against the strike strip, and it caught on the first try. She held the flame to the birch bark. The bark curled and blackened and then took, and the fire climbed into the cedar, and within a minute the whole grate was popping, and the room had that particular smell that fires in old cottages have, sap and dry wood and stone warming for the first time in weeks. She sat down on the braided rug in front of the hearth. Frances came in from the kitchen holding 2 mugs of hot water with tea bags floating in them. She set one on the small side table by the leather armchair. She kept the other in her hands. She lowered herself into the chair slowly, the way older knees lower themselves, and she wrapped both her palms around the mug and looked at the fire. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fire spoke enough. It cracked and settled and threw its yellow light across the floor and across the mantel and across the pale skin of Frances Doolittle's face. And Meredith watched that face because she did not yet know what a face like that was for. Eyes still on the flames when the words came. He was 46 years old when he stood at the county office and asked to take you home. Meredith felt the sentence land in her chest before she understood it. She turned toward Frances. Frances kept her eyes on the fire, as though she had to look somewhere else to be able to say any of it out loud. Your parents' funeral was on a Tuesday. Emmett drove to the county office on Wednesday morning. He put on the only tie he owned. He was there when the building unlocked at 8. He filled out every form they put in front of him. He sat in the waiting room until they called his name at 3 in the afternoon, and they told him no. The fire popped. I was single. He worked as a carpenter and did boat repair on the side. He lived alone in this cottage. He had never been married. He was 46 years old, and a woman across the desk from him told him that a 4-year-old girl needed something called stability, and a man of 46 on the water in Wisconsin, working 2 jobs, was not what they meant by that word. Frances lifted the mug to her lips. She did not drink. She only held it there. He came home that night. He sat in that chair, that one. A small nod at the armchair beneath her, and I sat where you are sitting now, because I had been sitting here since the funeral. And he did not cry. Emmett was not a man who cried in front of other people. He just said, Frances, I have to do this right. If I do it wrong, I lose her forever. The mug came down. And then he asked me a question. He asked me if I would help him keep track of where you were. Meredith did not move. She did not breathe for a beat. Because a question like that was not the question of a man giving up. It was the question of a man who had just been told no, and had already decided the no was temporary, and had already begun to build the long, slow plan by which he was going to outlast it. Frances turned her head toward Meredith for the first time. Her pale blue eyes were very steady. I said yes. The fire threw a spark that landed on the stone hearth and glowed for 2 seconds before it went black. I was a hospice nurse then, working out of the county hospital. I had a friend in the child welfare office. Not a friend in a bad way. A friend from church. Her name was Ellen Everson. She was a caseworker. She was also a woman who had lost her own sister to the system when they were girls in the 50s. She had opinions about how families were kept apart. Quiet opinions. The kind of opinions a woman keeps quiet in a state office. A small sip of tea. For 16 years, Ellen Everson called me on Thursday nights, from her own kitchen phone, never from the office. And she would tell me one thing: where you were, what town, what foster home, whether they had reassigned you, whether you were sick, whether you had made the school honor roll. She never gave me anything more than she could have said to any nosy neighbor. But she gave me enough. The mug returned to the side table. I called Emmett every Friday morning. From this cottage, with Ellen's information in my head, he wrote everything down in a green notebook he kept in the drawer under the sink. Every foster mother's name, every school, every address, every reported illness, every school photo Ellen described. He never asked me to send him a picture of you. He was afraid a picture would be a violation. He was afraid a violation would end the whole thing. Meredith's mouth was dry. She looked down at her own hands in her lap, and they were shaking so slightly she was not sure Frances could see. He drove to your recitals, your school concerts, your Christmas pageant in Antigua when you were 9. He stood at the back. He never spoke. He never approached. Every lawyer he had consulted, and he had consulted 5 over the years, had told him the same thing. If you showed up unannounced, if you tried to speak to her, if a caseworker saw you and reported it, any of it, you lose her the moment she turns 18, because they will flag her file, and she will grow up believing a strange man was following her, and that will be the story she carries out of the system. Not a story of an uncle, a story of a stranger. Frances paused. She looked at the fire again. So he did not speak. So he did not approach. So he stood behind Ferris wheels and behind gymnasium doors and behind the lemonade booth at the Langlade County Fair. And he counted every one of you, every year, every event, every school photo Ellen ever described to me. Her eyes closed for a second. And every Friday he asked me the same question at the end of our call. Frances, was she warm this week? Not was she happy? Not was she fed? Was she warm? Because he had lost his sister and her husband in an ice storm on Highway 45 in the middle of a January night. And the word warm was the only word big enough for what he needed you to be. Meredith felt her face crumple. She turned it toward the fire so that Frances would not have to look at it. Behind her came the soft sound of Frances lifting a shopping bag she had set beside the armchair. The soft rustle of tissue paper. The soft, patient sounds of a woman who had known this evening would come and had prepared for every minute of it. There is a box. Quieter now. In the cedar chest under the window in the front bedroom. Emmett asked me not to touch it. He said it was for you to open. He said if I opened it first, some of what was in it would belong to me. And he said none of it was supposed to belong to anyone but you. Meredith stood up. Her legs, this time, felt unsteady in a different way. Not the exhausted unsteadiness of a girl who had not eaten. The unsteady steps of a girl who was walking toward a door she had been walking toward without knowing it for 16 years. She went into the small front bedroom. The bed was made with a hand-stitched quilt of blues and creams. The window looked out at the lake. The cedar chest sat under the sill. She lifted the lid. Inside, on top of a folded stack of wool blankets, sat a cardboard box the size of a shoebox, then two more the same size beneath it, then two more beneath those. 5 boxes in all, each one labeled in black marker on the lid. Ages 4 to 7, ages 8 to 11, ages 12 to 15, ages 16 to 18, age 19 to 20. The last box was smaller than the others, because the last box was not yet full. She lifted the top box out. It was heavier than she had expected. She carried it back into the living room and set it on the braided rug in front of the fire. Frances did not speak. Frances only watched. Meredith went back for the next box. Then the next. Then the next. Then the last. 5 boxes in a row on the rug. She knelt. She opened the first one. The box was full of envelopes, all the same cream color as the letter she had opened on the mantel, all addressed to Meredith Osterberg. None of them stamped. None of them mailed. They were bundled in stacks of 3 or 4, tied with twine, each bundle labeled in her uncle's slanted, careful hand. 5th birthday. 1st day of kindergarten. Best guess. The Sunday she started singing in the church choir at Foster Home 3. The week she was moved to the Antigo family. 9th birthday. The concert. Christmas she got the red jacket. Meredith untied the first bundle. She lifted out a small envelope. She unfolded the letter inside. Dear Meredith, today is your 5th birthday. Frances tells me you are living in a house on Maple Street in Green Bay with a family who has a small brown dog. Frances tells me the dog is very old and very kind and sleeps on the floor next to your bed. I hope you are being warm this winter. I bought a stuffed bear at the drugstore today. It is on the mantel. I do not know if I will ever be able to give it to you, but it will be here when you come. I love you already, and I have not even met you yet. Uncle Emmett. Meredith put the letter down on the rug. She could not, for a moment, pick up the next one, because a 5-year-old girl on Maple Street in Green Bay, in a house with an old brown dog, had once been her, and the small stuffed bear from the drugstore had been sitting on this mantel her whole life, and she had never known. She reached for the next letter. She read it, then the next, then the next. She read for a long time. The letters were short, almost all of them. Her uncle had not been a man of many words. Each letter was a paragraph, sometimes 2. Weather. What Frances had told him about her that week. Something small he had done that day. A description of a chair he was building. A note about a fish he had caught. And at the end of every letter, no matter what, the same closing. Be warm this week. I love you. Uncle Emmett. Frances rose from the armchair without a sound. She went into the kitchen. Meredith heard the small domestic sounds of a woman making a plate, a knife on ceramic, the oven door, the soft clink of a fork on a saucer. Frances came back with a small china plate. On it sat a warm wedge of the chicken pie, a slice of butter bread, a silver fork laid across the edge. The plate came down on the floor beside Meredith. The words that went with it were low, almost distracted, as though Frances were only stating a fact of physics. You have not eaten. Read while you eat. Emmett would not have wanted you to choose. Meredith did not lift her head. She lifted the fork. She ate. She ate 2 bites before she began to cry, and she cried without stopping while she ate the rest of the wedge of chicken pie and the slice of butter bread. And she read her way through the ages 4 through 7 box and the ages 8 through 11 box. And by the time she reached the ages 12 through 15 box, the plate was empty and the fire had begun to burn low, and Frances had risen once, quietly, to lay another log on the flames. Meredith did not know how much time passed. When she looked up at the window, it was black. Full night. The lake outside was invisible now. Only her own reflection in the dark glass, kneeling on the rug beside a wall of open envelopes. Frances sat in the armchair. She was knitting. She had produced a small ball of pale gray wool and a set of wooden needles from her bag, and she was working slow, even stitches, her lips moving very slightly with the count. She did not push Meredith. She only kept her company, which was the difference between a nurse and everybody else in the world. A nurse knew that sitting beside somebody was the whole job. Meredith sat back on her heels. Her voice was hoarse from crying without noise for 2 hours. Frances, why did no one ever tell me? The needles did not stop. Because Ellen Everson would have lost her job. Because your uncle would have lost his last legal path to you. Because I would have lost every friend I had in the child welfare system. Because the moment any of us said one word out loud to you, the whole thing collapsed, and you would have grown up knowing there was a man who was watching you, but you would not have been allowed to meet him. And Emmett said, more than once, that the only thing worse than a girl who did not know she was loved was a girl who knew she was loved and could not be reached. Meredith absorbed that, so he chose the first one. He chose the plan that ended with you sitting in front of this fireplace on your 20th year, with every letter and every spoon in your lap. Even if he could not be here to see it. He was very sure. He was patient. He was the most patient man I have ever known in my life, and I have sat beside a lot of patient men at the end of theirs. Meredith lifted the box marked age 1920. It was lighter than the others because it was not yet full. Inside were 14 envelopes. She untied them. She read the first one. Dear Meredith, today Frances tells me you have signed your release forms from the group home on 5th Avenue and that you will be aging out of the extended foster program at the end of the summer. You are almost 20 years old. I have started counting the days. I do not think I will make it to your birthday this year. I have been to see a doctor twice this month. I am tired in a way I have not been tired before, but I am also not afraid, because I have a plan for you, and Frances will be here, and Perry has the papers, and you will walk into this house and it will already be yours. Be warm this week. I love you. Uncle Emmett. Meredith set the letter down. She reached for the next one. She read her way through the 14th letter, which was dated 11 days before he died. And by the last one, his handwriting had gotten smaller and more careful, the way handwriting gets when the hand is tired but the mind is still counting. Then there was one envelope left. The last one. Unnumbered, undated on the outside. She opened it. Dear Meredith, I am writing this on a Tuesday afternoon. Frances is here. She has just brought me soup. She thinks I am asleep. I want to finish this one before she sees me writing. The doctor says maybe 3 weeks. I do not know if he is right, but I know that if he is right, I will not see your birthday. So I finished your spoon this morning. It is the 20th. It is in the box. I wanted you to have all 20 when you came, because a person should have 20 birthdays waiting for them if they have not had any yet. Be warm this week, Meredith. Be warm every week. I love you. Uncle Emmett. Meredith folded the letter. She placed it back in the envelope. She placed the envelope on top of the last box. She sat with her hands in her lap and she was not crying anymore. She had passed through crying into something quieter, into the flat, clear place on the other side of a long grief where a person begins, for the first time, to see what is real. Because he had lived and he had loved her every Friday for 16 years, and he had built her a cottage full of butter and marigolds and a spoon for a birthday he knew he would not see. And she had lived her whole life inside the wrong story about herself, and the right story had been waiting for her on a mantel in Wisconsin the entire time. Frances set down her knitting. She reached into her coat pocket. She withdrew a small object wrapped in a scrap of soft flannel. She held it out to Meredith. He carried this every day. He asked me to give it to you the first night you slept in this house. Meredith took the flannel. She unwrapped it in her lap. Inside was a brass pocket watch. Old, dulled by decades of being held in a working man's hand. The chain was gone. The face was clean. The second hand was still, because no one had wound it in 3 weeks. She turned it over in her hand. She pressed the small catch. The lid sprang open. Inside, tucked behind a thin glass oval, was a photograph. A little girl, 4 years old, blonde hair falling in her eyes. She was laughing at whoever had taken the picture. She was holding a small stuffed bear against her chest with both arms. The stuffed bear from the drugstore, on the mantel, in the letter from her 5th birthday. Meredith did not remember the photograph being taken. She did not remember being 4. She did not remember her parents' faces, most days, but she remembered the bear. The bear had been given to her in a plastic bag with all her other belongings, at the intake office in Green Bay, on the day the caseworker had taken her from her parents' house. The bear had traveled with her through the first 3 foster homes. She had lost it, or it had been taken, or it had been left behind, somewhere around age 8, in a move she had not been given time to pack. She had not seen the bear in 12 years. She had not remembered the bear in almost that long. She turned the pocket watch over in her hand and she looked at the back. 6 words were engraved into this brass, small, deep, cut by someone who had known the words needed to last, until she knows she is loved. Meredith closed the watch. She held it in her closed fist against her chest. She did not know for how long. When she finally opened her eyes, the fire had burned down to red coals and Frances had, at some point, taken the empty china plate back to the kitchen and washed it and set it in the drying rack. She had returned and was sitting in the armchair again, knitting again, quiet again. Meredith spoke without looking up. Frances, was there anything else? Anything he wanted me to know that you have not told me? The needles kept moving. Yes. The words sat in the room for a beat. Then Frances lifted her eyes. She looked toward the hearth. Emmett built the fireplace himself, 25 years ago. He hauled every stone up from the lake shore over one whole summer. He said he wanted a chimney that would still be standing after the cottage was gone. He said stones outlast wood. He measured every stone twice. If a stone was even a little wrong for its place, he set it aside and used it in the boathouse instead. A pause. Look at the hearth. Meredith looked. The hearthstones fit together so exactly that the seams between them were almost invisible. All except one. One stone, in the center of the hearth, sat perhaps a quarter of an inch higher than the stones around it. Not enough that a stranger would ever have noticed. Enough that a stranger's niece, sitting on the rug directly in front of it, would. He would not have put a stone in wrong. He put that one there on purpose, because he wanted you to see it, because he wanted you to know that it comes up. Meredith rose to her knees. She placed her hands on the stone. She pressed against the raised edge. Nothing happened. She pressed harder. The stone shifted. She looked over her shoulder at Frances, and Frances nodded once, slowly, and Meredith lifted. The stone came out clean. Below it was a shallow cavity carved into the concrete of the foundation, perhaps 8 inches deep, rectangular, and in the cavity sat a small metal box, dull with age, the color of tarnished silver, with 2 small brass latches on its front. She lifted it out. It was heavier than she had expected. Not iron heavy, full heavy, the heavy of something with a lot of paper inside. She sat back on the rug with the box in her lap. She undid the 2 latches. She lifted the lid. On top of everything else lay one more envelope, cream, sealed with a small dab of red wax. Across the front, in Emmett's slanted, careful hand, read this before anything else. Meredith broke the seal. She unfolded the letter. Dear Meredith, If you have opened this box, then Francis has told you the story, and you have read the letters, and you are sitting on the rug in front of the fireplace, and you are probably wondering why any of what is under this letter matters. Because you are the girl who did not have a coat that fit her in the fourth grade. You are the girl who slept in the group home on Fifth Avenue and shared a bunk with the girl who talked in her sleep. You are the girl who thought no one had ever looked for her. Money is at the bottom of this box. There is a lot of it. I want you to know before you read the numbers that money is not what I'm leaving you. Money can change where a person sleeps. Money cannot change what a person believes about herself. If all I leave you is money, then I have failed you. What I want to leave you is this: that your life was worth being prepared for. That someone spent almost 20 years believing you were going to walk in that front door and sit on that rug and read this letter, and lived every day of those years in a way that would make it possible. You were prepared for. You were expected. Now open the papers. Uncle Emmett. Meredith set the letter aside. She reached into the box. She lifted out the first stack of papers. Bank statements, held together by a rubber band that had gone soft with age. She opened them. The account numbers she did not understand. The bank names she vaguely knew. The dates went back nearly 40 years. The balance on the top statement, dated August of that same year, was a number so large she read it 3 times before her brain agreed to see it. $2.4 million. She looked up at Francis. Francis was still knitting, but her hands had gone slow. Emmett started with nothing, the voice quiet against the crackle of coals. He built boats for the marina in the summer. He built cabinets for people in town all year. He fixed docks. He fixed roofs. Sometimes he took 3 jobs at the same time. He lived on almost nothing. He wore the same brown jacket for 22 years. He drove a truck that he had rebuilt from parts. Everything he did not need went into an account. Every extra dollar, every tip, every bit of side work he did not tell the county about. He said it was for the day the state finally let go of you. He said choices cost money. He wanted you to have choices. Meredith set the bank statement down. She reached into the box again. Under the bank statements were investment records. She did not understand the numbers on those either. She knew the names of some of the companies. Underneath the investment records were property deeds. The cottage, the boathouse, a small parcel of unbuilt land on the west shore of the lake, 10 acres. Underneath the deeds was a leather journal, dark brown, cracked at the spine. Meredith opened the journal. It was a ledger of visits. April 12, 2011, school spring concert, Antigo Elementary, 4th row, back of gymnasium. She sang second from the left in the alto row, blue sweater, braid, warm. November 3, 2013, middle school volleyball match, Marinette, bleachers, north side. She served the ball twice, both times over. Warm. June 8, 2017, high school honors ceremony parking lot, Green Bay, red pickup. She stood at the back of the group in a rented gown, cap crooked. Warm. Meredith turned pages. There were hundreds of entries. Hundreds. Every visit dated. Every location recorded. Every single one ending with the same word. Warm. She closed the journal. She sat with it in her hands and she could not move. Under the journal, at the very bottom of the metal box, was one more thing. A folded map. County survey paper. Cream-colored. Faded along the folds. Big. Almost the size of a card table when it opened. She lifted it out. She unfolded it, carefully, on the floor beside the box. The map showed Lake Nicolet and the 10 miles of land around it. It was hand-annotated in her uncle's slanted script. Small notes in the margins, lines drawn in blue pencil, areas shaded in green, a few areas shaded in red. Across the top of the map, in her uncle's hand, one line was written in dark ink. When they come asking for the land, read this first. Meredith looked up at Francis. Francis was no longer knitting. Francis had set the needles down. Francis was watching the front window. Outside, on the gravel of the driveway, twin headlights had just come around the curve of the drive. They swept across the porch. They stopped. A car door opened. A car door closed. A second car door opened. A second car door closed. Two sets of footsteps on the gravel. Meredith looked at the clock on the mantel. It was 8:10 at night. Nobody drove out to the cottage on Lake Nicollet at 8:10 on a Saturday night in October by accident. Frances rose from the armchair, slowly, without hurry. She smoothed the front of her wool coat. Though she was not wearing it now, the gesture was old muscle memory. She stepped to the window. She parted the curtain by 1/2 inch. She looked. She did not say a word, but her jaw set. And Meredith understood, from the set of that jaw, that whoever was walking up the porch steps had been expected, not by Meredith, by Frances, and before Frances, by Emmett. Frances let the curtain fall. She turned back to Meredith, voice low, even. His name is Devlin Marchetti. He runs a firm called Highland Ridge Partners. He has been trying to buy this land for 11 years. Your uncle told him no, in writing, 6 separate times. 3 sharp knocks landed against the front door. Not the soft even 3 of Frances that afternoon. Not the knock of someone who had been rehearsing the moment for weeks. 3 hard, confident knocks. The knock of a man who did not doubt that a door would open when he raised his hand. Meredith looked down at the metal box in her lap, at the map spread open on the floor, at the words her uncle had written across the top of the map, in dark ink, in the last months of his life. When they come asking for the land, read this first. They had come. She closed the metal box. She folded the map. Once, twice, 3 times. She slid it back inside the box, on top of the ledger, on top of the deeds, on top of the investment records, on top of the bank statements, on top of the letter that had told her she was expected. She stood up. Her hand went, without asking her permission, into the pocket of her jacket. Her fingers closed around the brass pocket watch. She felt the 6-word engraving through the metal against her palm. She walked to the door. Frances stepped back to give her room, because it was Meredith's door now. Meredith turned the knob. She opened the door. The man on the porch was tall, 50-something, charcoal wool overcoat with the collar turned up, silver hair combed back, a leather portfolio under his left arm, shoes polished to a shine that did not belong on a gravel driveway at night in October. Behind him, on the second step, stood a younger man in a puffer jacket holding a clipboard, an assistant, a witness. The way a man like this never came anywhere alone. Devlin Marchetti smiled the small, warm smile of a man who had been trained to smile at grieving strangers. His voice was low and gentle when he introduced himself. Miss Osterberg, I am so sorry to intrude on you tonight. My name is Devlin Marchetti. I represent Highland Ridge Partners. I was very sorry to hear about your uncle. I have wanted to speak with you since the moment I learned of his passing. His eyes moved past her shoulder. Just for a second. Not into the room. Past the room. Across the floor. Past the fire. To the hearth. He was looking for the raised stone. He knew exactly where to look. Meredith felt something cold move up the back of her neck, one vertebra at a time, and settle at the base of her skull. She did not open the door wider. She did not step aside. She kept her hand on the knob. Behind her came the very soft sound of Frances Doolittle taking one deliberate step closer, so that she was standing just at Meredith's left shoulder. The sound of a woman who had spent 31 years being a witness at hard doors. The sound of a woman who was still on the job. Meredith looked at Devlin Marchetti. She looked at the man behind him. She looked at the shine of shoes that had never walked a gravel driveway on their own. The voice that came out of her was quieter than she thought it would come out, but was, for the first time in her life, entirely her own. You are 11 years too late. The smile on Devlin Marchetti's face did not move, but something behind his eyes shifted. The way a door in a very large house closes softly on the far side of the hall, and only the person who lives there notices. Behind Meredith, in the fireplace, a log settled into the coals with a soft, dry crack, and the raised stone on the hearth, its secret already taken and folded away, sat exactly where Emmett Osterberg had placed it, waiting for the next person who thought they knew where to look. Devlin Marchetti did not stop smiling. He tilted his head, in the practiced way of a man who had been taught that a small tilt made a hard sentence sound like an invitation. And he lifted his portfolio out from under his arm and held it in both hands in front of him. I understand. This has been a difficult few days for you. May I leave a proposal with you for when you are ready to consider your options?" Meredith did not answer. She did not need to, because Francis did not move an inch, and the fire behind them cracked once, and Devlin Marchetti understood, on some old animal level, that the door was not going to open any wider tonight. He set the portfolio on the porch floor. He straightened. He tipped his head one more time. "I will call your attorney on Monday. He and I have spoken before. I trust him. I hope, in time, you will also." He turned. His assistant turned with him. The gravel crunched twice under four polished shoes. The doors of a black SUV opened and closed. The headlights swept across the pines and away. Meredith stood in the open doorway until the sound of the engine had faded down the county road. Then she reached down and picked up the portfolio. She carried it inside. She closed the door. She walked to the kitchen and set the portfolio on the counter beside the pie. She did not open it. She stood at the counter for a long moment with her palms flat on either side of the leather folder. From the doorway behind her, quietly, without pressure, Francis offered the thing a nurse offers. "You will want to open it, even if you have decided already, because you cannot say no to a thing you have not looked at." Meredith opened it. The number on the first page was the largest number she had ever seen, with her own name typed next to it. Enough to buy a house anywhere. Enough to pay for 4 years of college. Enough to never sleep on a bench again. Enough to walk out of Wisconsin and never look back. She closed the folder. She did not feel tempted, which surprised her. Because a week ago, on a bench in Duluth with $9 in her pocket, this number would have been the miracle she had asked God for in the small dark hours when she still believed God took requests. Now she looked at it the way a person looks at the wrong shirt in the right size. It fit. It was not hers. She turned to Francis. "Tomorrow, I need to see Perry Whitmore, and I need to see the library, and I need to see whoever else there is to see. Because whatever my uncle was protecting, I need to know what it is, in my own hands, before that man calls anyone." Francis nodded once. Small, slow, complete. "I will drive you." Meredith slept that night in the small front bedroom, on the hand-stitched quilt, with the 20 spoons laid out on the pine table in the alcove, and the pocket watch on the nightstand, and the fire burned down to soft orange in the grate through the open door. She did not remember falling asleep. She woke at first light because a loon on the lake called once and then again, and the sound climbed the shore and slipped through her window and pulled her out of a dream she did not remember. She lay on her back for a long minute. Then she got up, made the bed with the corners squared, went to the kitchen. Francis was already there. The coffee was already made. 2 mugs sat on the counter, a plate of buttered toast, a small dish of raspberry jam. Neither of them spoke. They ate. They put on their coats. They went out to Francis's truck. The county road curved beside the lake the way it had the day before, except the light was different now, low and pink and clean, the way October mornings are up north, when the frost has just lifted and the pines still hold it in their shadows. Perry Whitmore's office was above the hardware store on Main Street in Mercer Landing, a single flight of narrow wooden stairs, a frosted glass door with his name in gold letters that had begun to flake, a small reception room with 2 chairs and a jade plant on the windowsill, a back office where he worked alone. He was waiting for them. He had heard, evidently, in the way small towns hear things overnight, that Devlin Marchetti had driven up to the Osterberg place at 8:10 on a Saturday. He rose from his desk when they came in. His glasses slid down his nose. He did not push them back up. He gestured at the 2 chairs across from his desk. He sat. The first sentence out of him came without preamble. "I hoped he would give you longer." He did not. Meredith sat. She placed the leather portfolio on his desk. She slid it across. Perry did not open it. He waved the offer aside with the back of 2 fingers, the way a man waves off an old joke he has already heard. "I do not need to read it. I know what number is in it. I know because I have been watching him raise the offer for 11 years. Emmett kept every single one. Every offer letter is in a folder in the metal box under the hearth." Meredith looked up. "You knew about the box." "I did the will. I was the second person, after Francis, who was told where he kept things. I was under instruction not to open it or read the contents. Emmett was very particular that you be the one to lift the stone. He folded his hands on his desk. His hands were older than the rest of him. Big veined hands that had done, at some earlier stage of his life, work that was not paperwork. There is something Devlin Marchetti did not tell you at your door last night. He will tell you soon. He tells everyone eventually. So I am going to tell you first. The jade plant on the windowsill caught a sliver of morning sun. On Wednesday of this week, Highland Ridge Partners filed a petition in the county court to set aside your uncle's will. On the grounds of testamentary incapacity, they allege that Emmett Osterberg was not of sound mind when he signed the will 3 months ago. They have 13 witnesses ready to swear to it. Meredith felt her hands go very cold on the arms of the chair. They have a woman who cleans the church, who says he sometimes forgot her name in the last year. They have the man who runs the gas station who says he came in one morning and could not remember why. They have a fishing buddy who says he set out for the lake in July and turned around at his own driveway. Small things, human things, the kind of things that happen to everyone in their 60s, but 13 of them, in a row, in front of a judge, is not a small thing. Perry looked at her over the rim of his glasses. His voice went quieter. If they win, the will is thrown out, because Emmett had no other surviving relatives on record. The state takes the property, and the state, in a rural county with a tax-based problem, sells the land at auction, and a man with a leather portfolio full of numbers walks in and buys it. And every letter your uncle wrote you becomes, legally, the letters of a man who did not know what he was doing. Meredith absorbed the sentence. She absorbed the fact that it was the second sentence in 24 hours to rearrange the whole shape of her life. She looked down at her hands. How long do we have? The petition is scheduled for a hearing in 3 weeks. 3 weeks, which was, she noticed, the exact interval between her uncle's death and her own arrival in this town, as though the calendar had been laid out by someone who understood pressure. She looked at Perry. Then we have 3 weeks. Francis, who had said nothing until this moment, spoke from the chair beside her. The words came low and even, the way instructions come from a person who has already thought about every step of them. You should go to the library today. There is a woman there named Bernadette Halverson. She has been waiting for you also. Emmett spent 30 years in her reading room, 1 afternoon a week. If there is a defense against a petition like this, she has it in a file. The public library of Iron Range County sat on the corner of Main and Superior. A single-story brick building, a green awning, a slate walk lined with hostas gone brown for the winter. Meredith and Francis went up the 2 low steps and inside. The library smelled the way libraries smelled everywhere in the North Country. Old paper, steam radiators, cold coffee in a percolator that had been running since before the doors opened. The woman at the front desk was somewhere in her late 60s. Salt and pepper hair pinned at the nape of her neck, reading glasses on a chain, a pale blue cardigan buttoned to the throat. She was sorting returned books into carts with the small, precise motions of a woman who had been sorting books in this exact room for 4 decades. She looked up when they came in. She looked at Francis first. Something passed between them, small, silent. The nod of 2 women who had been coordinating the same quiet plan for a long time. Then she looked at Meredith. Bernadette Halverson set down the book she was holding. She did not smile, because a smile would have been too small for the moment. She only came around the desk and stood in front of Meredith and looked at her for a long, careful beat. He said you would come in the 3rd week of October. Meredith did not know how to answer that. Bernadette did not need her to. A small tilt of the chin toward the back of the building was the whole invitation. Come with me, both of you. They followed her past the reading room, past the children's section, past a door marked staff only, into a small back room that smelled of dust and dry paper and cardboard. Bernadette went to a shelf on the far wall. From it she lifted down a single archival box, gray, standard size, sealed with a strip of white tape, labeled in Emmett Osterberg's slanted careful hand, for Meredith, when they come asking for the land. Bernadette set the box on the reading table in the center of the room. She stepped back. The explanation came at the pace of a librarian citing a source. Precise, no flourish. He asked me to keep this here, because he did not want it in the cottage if a fire ever took the cottage. He said this was the second half of what he was leaving you. Meredith cut the tape, She lifted the lid. Inside the box, in careful order, were three things. The first was a fat manila folder labeled a Quafer. Inside were geological survey reports going back to 1978, water table maps annotated in blue pencil in her uncle's hand, chemical composition analyses from the State Department of Natural Resources dated across 4 decades, and a handwritten list of every household in 2 towns whose wells drew from the same underground water. 94 households, 231 people. Emmett had put a small check mark next to each family name. I had known them. Everyone. The second was a folder labeled Offers. Inside were the 6 written offers Highland Ridge Partners had made over 11 years, each one paper-clipped to Emmett's written refusal. The refusals grew shorter over time. The last one, dated 2 years ago, was 1 line long. The answer is no. It will continue to be no. The third was smaller, a slim leather notebook, wine-colored, ribbon marker. Meredith opened it. The first page was labeled in her uncle's hand. Record of clear-minded conversations. Emmett Osterberg. Beginning January 8 of last year. Every entry was dated. Every entry had a time. Every entry had a subject. January 8, 10:14 a.m. Discussed with Bernadette H. The 1978 survey and its comparison to the 2021 revised aquifer boundary. Discussed at length. She noted my recall of Section 4B was accurate. She signed below. Beneath, in a different hand, small and careful, confirmed. Bernadette Halverson. January 8th. Meredith turned the page. January 15, 10:20 a.m. Discussed with Bernadette H. The county property tax records from 1992 through 2006. Recalled the specific reassessment year for parcels along County Road Q. She noted my recall was accurate. She signed below. Confirmed. Bernadette Halverson. January 15. Meredith turned another page. February 5, 10:10 a.m. Discussed with Bernadette H. and Francis D. the medications I am currently taking and their effects on cognition. I identified each medication by name and dose. They noted my identifications were accurate. They signed below. Confirmed. Bernadette Halverson. February 5, confirmed. Francis Doolittle, RN retired. February 5, Meredith looked up slowly. She looked at Bernadette. She looked at Francis. Neither of them looked away. He knew, her voice thin. He knew this was going to happen. Francis answered, quiet and even. He knew a petition of this kind was possible from the moment he refused the 6th offer. Devlin Marchetti threatened it in writing. It is in the offers folder. Page 3 of his last letter. Meredith opened the offers folder. She turned to the last letter. She flipped to page 3. There, in the second paragraph, in the same corporate tone Devlin had used at her door last night, was a single sentence. It would be a great sadness for all parties if the disposition of your estate were ever to be complicated by questions of your mental fitness at the time of drafting. The sentence was underlined, by her uncle, in blue pencil. Meredith understood. She sat down at the reading table. She looked at the wine-colored notebook, at the 60 pages of dated entries, at the signatures of a retired hospice nurse and a small-town librarian who had been building, one Thursday morning at a time, a legal record their friend would not live to defend himself with, very quietly. He built his own defense. Bernadette's answer came low and precise, correcting a citation. He built yours. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Bernadette pulled out a chair across the table from Meredith. She sat down. She pushed the notebook a small distance closer to Meredith with 2 fingertips. The instruction came at the same measured tempo she used with a first-time reader at the reference desk. I'm going to teach you to read Section 4B of the Environmental Report, because you will need to speak about it in front of a room of your neighbors in 3 weeks. And you cannot let anyone else speak it for you. You have to speak it yourself, in your own voice, because a young woman who understands her own inheritance is harder to erase than a young woman who inherited it by luck. Meredith did not say yes. She reached for the report. She spent the rest of the morning at that table, Bernadette on one side, Francis on the other, quietly knitting. The sun climbed the tall library windows. The steam radiators hissed. A cart of returned books rolled past the door once and someone laughed softly in the front room and went out again. She read Section 4B. She read it again. She read the 1978 baseline. She read the 2021 revision. She read the state's list of protected watersheds. She read the definition of a conservation easement. She read the difference between mineral rights and surface rights. She read the case history of a farm in Douglas County that had tried to block a similar development in 2011 and lost. She read the case history of a small trust in Bayfield County that had tried and won. Bernadette did not lecture. Bernadette pointed with the tip of a pencil. Occasionally, a small directive dropped into the quiet. Read this paragraph twice. This word is more important than it looks. Sometimes only the pencil, tapping once beside a footnote, then withdrawing. When the church bell across the square rang noon, Meredith looked up from the report and realized she had not thought about her own hunger in 4 hours, which was a first in her life. She had been reading the way her uncle had wanted her to be able to read. Not to survive, to hold ground. Frances went across the street to the diner and came back with 3 grilled cheese sandwiches wrapped in paper and 3 cups of tomato soup with the lids taped down. They ate at the table. Bernadette wiped her fingers on a paper napkin and returned to the archives box. She had one more thing to give Meredith. She lifted a small envelope from the bottom of the box. It had been sealed. Cream. The wax was the same dried leaf red as the letter on the mantel, across the front. In Emmett's hand, only if she chooses to fight. Bernadette set the envelope in front of Meredith. The rule that came with it was spoken flat. No persuasion. It was very clear. Francis and I were not to give this to you unless you had already decided. Because he said choosing to fight has to come from you, not from a letter. Meredith looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then she looked up at Bernadette, then at Francis, her voice level, no flourish. I have decided, she broke the seal. Dear Meredith, if you have opened this letter, then you have already chosen to stand, which means everything I am about to tell you, you can take in whatever way makes you free. I did not write you all those letters because I wanted you to be the one who defended this land. I wrote them because I wanted you to know that your life was already worth being prepared for. Before you did anything at all. Before you fought anyone. Before you saved anyone. Before you became anything. The land is one option. It is not the only one. If you decide, when you finish reading this, that you would rather sell it and take the money and go somewhere warm and study and live and never come back to this cottage, I want you to hear me clearly. I would still be proud. I would be proud because you would be making a choice, which is the one thing I could never give you while you were a child. The one thing I spent my whole adult life quietly saving so that you could have. I did not write you letters to give you a job. I wrote you letters to give you a choice. Do not spend your life trying to become the person you think I wanted you to be. Become the person you were always going to be. That will be enough for me. It was always going to be enough for me. Be warm this week. Meredith. Be warm every week. I love you. Uncle Emmett. Meredith folded the letter. She placed it back inside its envelope. She put both hands flat on the reading table and she looked down at her own hands. And she thought about the 16 years of Fridays her uncle had asked one question in a phone call to a retired hospice nurse. And she thought about the 231 people whose wells drew from the same water. And she thought about the girl she had been on a bench in Duluth 6 days ago, counting cracks in a sidewalk because counting was the only thing that belonged to her. Now the sidewalk had become a lake. Now the counting had become a report. Now the thing that belonged to her had become a choice. Quietly. Then I choose to fight. Bernadette did not smile. Francis did not smile. But something in each of their faces settled, the way a shore settles when the water stops moving. And Meredith understood that she had just made the sentence 3 women had been waiting 11 years to hear. They worked for 2 more weeks. Bernadette drilled her on Section 4B. Frances drove her to every household on the list of 94 wells. And Meredith knocked on 94 front doors. And she stood on 94 porches. And she said the same sentence to every person who opened. My name is Meredith Osterberg. My uncle was Emmett Osterberg. He believed your water was worth protecting. I would like to know if you still agree. She did not ask for anything. She only asked if they agreed. 91 of the 94 households said yes. 2 said they needed to think about it. 1 did not open the door. Perry Whitmore filed a response to Highland Ridge Partners' petition. He attached the wine-colored notebook. He attached Frances Doolittle's professional credentials as a retired hospice nurse. He attached Bernadette Halverson's 40 years of employment records at the county library. He attached Emmett Osterberg's Iron Range County property tax filings for the last 30 years, all filed by his own hand, all signed clearly, all filed on time. He attached the manila folder marked Aquifer. He attached one last thing. He attached a signed letter from Emmett's family physician, Dr. Ellis Radford, of Mercer Landing, a physician Emmett had seen for 22 years, who had performed a complete cognitive evaluation on Emmett Osterberg 6 weeks before his death, and who had, at Emmett's specific request, put the results in writing in a sealed envelope, and left the envelope with Perry Whitmore's office in a folder marked patient copy, not to be opened unless formally challenged. The cognitive evaluation showed a man of clear mind, slower recall on names, perfect recall on numbers, dates, and spatial reasoning, verbal reasoning above age norm, mood stable, judgment sound, signed, dated, notarized. Emmett had signed his own name at the bottom, in the slanted, careful script Meredith now knew by heart. He had built the defense in advance. He had built her the shape of a room she could stand up in. The hearing was held at the community hall attached to the old Lutheran church at the north end of town. Not a courthouse. The county had made an accommodation. The petition affected too many local wells to hold the hearing in the small courthouse in the next town over. The community hall had folding chairs, a coffee urn on the back table, a pot of chrysanthemums beside the podium that someone from the Church Women's Guild had put there without being asked. The hall was full. Every one of the 91 households who had said yes was there. Some brought their children, some brought their grandmothers. The oldest woman in the room was 101. She sat in the front row with a plaid blanket across her knees. Her name was Iona Krzeminski. Her family had drawn water from a well on Old County Line Road since 1922. Devlin Marchetti sat at the petitioner's table with 2 attorneys and a paralegal. His portfolio was open in front of him. His silver hair was still combed back. His shoes were still polished. The county judge, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a very tired expression, called the hearing to order. Devlin's attorney went first. I was competent. He was polished. He walked the judge through his 13 witnesses. He did it well. He described a slow decline. He described forgetfulness. He described a man in his 60s whose grip on his own affairs was, in the attorney's careful phrase, less firm than he himself understood. He said the word tragedy twice. He said the word incapacity 4 times. He did not say the word aquifer at all. He sat down. Perry Whitmore rose. He walked the judge through the wine-colored notebook. He walked her through Frances Doolittle's 41 years as a licensed registered nurse in the state of Wisconsin, 28 of them in hospice. He walked through Bernadette Halverson's 4 decades at the reading table. He walked her through Dr. Ellis Radford's cognitive evaluation. He walked her through Emmett Osterberg's tax filings. In closing, one sentence. My client did not decline. My client prepared. He sat down. The judge looked at Meredith. Her voice was formal but not unkind. Miss Osterberg, you have the right to speak. It is not required. You may pass, if you wish. Meredith rose. She had not written a speech. Bernadette had offered to help her write one. Frances had offered to help her practice one. Perry had strongly suggested she prepare bullet points. She had said no to all 3. She had said no because she had understood, at some point over the last 2 weeks, that a speech is a thing you write to convince a room of strangers. But this room was not strangers. This room was the 91 households and the 101-year-old woman and the 2 women who had kept a promise for 16 years and 1 attorney with a jade plant on his windowsill and 1 man in polished shoes who had underestimated her uncle. She did not need to convince this room. She only needed to tell this room the truth. She stepped up to the small wooden podium at the front of the hall. The pocket watch was in her jacket pocket. She could feel it against her hip, warm from her body. She began, without any preamble. 6 days ago, I was sleeping on a bench in the Duluth bus terminal. I had $9. 3 weeks ago, I aged out of extended foster care. I did not know I had an uncle. I did not know I had this town. I did not know anyone was expecting me. The hall was very quiet. Then a letter came, and I got on a bus, and I found a house, and in the house there was a box, and in the box there were 20 wooden spoons. My uncle had carved one for every birthday of my life. He carved the last one in the last week. He was strong enough to hold a knife. I never met him. Not once. He knew my name. He knew every foster home. He knew the town where I outgrew my winter jacket. He knew the concert I sang second alto in when I was 10. He wrote me a letter for every single one. He wrote me 247 letters. He never mailed one of them because he was told 6 times by 5 different attorneys that if he mailed one letter, he would lose the right to ever meet me legally after I turned 18. So he waited. She lifted her hand. She placed it flat over her jacket pocket, over the pocket watch. He died 3 weeks before I got there. She let the sentence sit. I want to tell you what he was. She looked at the judge. Then she turned, slowly. She looked at the 91 households. She looked at Iona Krzeminski in the front row with the plaid blanket. She looked at every one of them. I was a man who wore the same brown jacket for 22 years. He was a man who spent his whole adult life putting every extra dollar into an account for a niece he was not allowed to raise. He was a man who taught himself to read a county aquifer report the way most men his age learn to read the sports page. He was a man who, 6 weeks before he died, walked into Dr. Radford's office and asked for a cognitive evaluation. Because he already knew that the man in the polished shoes at that table would say what he is saying today. And my uncle wanted me to have a room I could stand up in when it happened. She paused. He was not confused. He was the most prepared human being I have ever heard of. And the reason he was that prepared was not this land. It was not this water. It was not the money in the bank. It was me. A niece he had counted for 16 years of Fridays, whether he ever got to touch her hand or not. She turned back to the judge. He built me a defense, in advance, signed, dated, notarized, because he wanted me to walk into this room today and be listened to, not pitied, listened to. And I will tell you what I have decided he was protecting when he refused 6 offers over 11 years. She looked down at her hands on the podium. I was protecting the water under the ground that Iona Krzeminski's family has drunk since 1922. He was protecting the well that the Sorensens drink from. He was protecting the well the Kalinowski twins learned to swim next to. He was protecting the well that the Mercer Landing Volunteer Fire Department pulls from when a barn goes up on the west side of the county. He was protecting a table full of names he wrote down on a list. 94 households. 231 people. He put a check mark next to every family. Because he knew them. All of them. She looked up. She looked at Devlin Marchetti for the first time since she had opened his portfolio in her uncle's kitchen. He was not protecting a piece of dirt. He was protecting his neighbors, which is the smallest and largest thing a man can do. And he did it for years without ever putting his own name on it. Because he did not want credit, he just wanted the water to be here when I got here. So it could still be here when the next girl got off the next bus. She stopped. She did not know what else to say. She stepped back from the podium. She sat down. The community hall did not applaud, because this was not that kind of room. This was a room of northern Wisconsin people at the end of October, and they showed what they thought by the way they sat, and every single person in that hall was sitting forward. The judge cleared her throat once. She addressed Devlin Marchetti's table, not unkindly, because judges in small counties do not gain anything by being unkind, but firmly. She asked whether petitioners wished to enter any rebuttal. Devlin's attorney rose. He conferred with Devlin. He conferred with the second attorney. He conferred with the paralegal. He sat back down. The withdrawal came out of him carefully, the way an announcement comes out of a man who has just recalculated the room. Petitioners were prepared to withdraw the petition. Devlin Marchetti did not look at Meredith. He looked at his own hands. He was a man who had spent a career winning rooms by walking into them with a portfolio. And he had, in the last 12 minutes, watched a 20-year-old girl take a room away from him with a pocket watch in her jacket and no notes in her hand. The judge accepted the withdrawal. She thanked the community for coming. She reminded everyone that the County Conservation Board would hold a separate hearing in 6 weeks to consider Meredith Osterberg's application for a permanent conservation easement on the land. She invited public comment at that hearing. She rose. She left the hall through the side door. The room did not empty immediately. The 91 households came up to Meredith, one at a time or in small family groups, and shook her hand or nodded to her or, in the case of one older woman with hands like her uncle's, held her hand between both of theirs for a long silent second and then let go without speaking. Iona Ksheminsky was the last. Someone rolled her chair to the front. Meredith knelt beside it. Iona's Polish-accented English came out soft, worn thin by 101 winters, but the meaning was steady. Her uncle used to fix her dock every spring, never asked for money, never asked for coffee. A plate on the porch was all it took, and he would eat it standing up and go home. He was a good man. A light hand patted Meredith's cheek, no heavier than a leaf. "You are a good girl." Then she nodded to whoever was pushing her chair, and she was rolled out into the October afternoon. 6 weeks later, the Conservation Board held its hearing. The easement passed, the shoreline of Lake Nicolet, from the county road to the water, and the 10 acres of unbuilt land on the west shore that Emmett Osterberg had bought parcel by parcel over 30 years, would be permanently protected. No drilling, no commercial development. The aquifer beneath it would be undisturbed for as long as the state of Wisconsin continued to keep its own promises, which was, of course, a promise no one could guarantee forever. But it was, for now, a promise that would hold. The cottage got painted the following spring. The porch got a new post to replace the one that had leaned. The chimney of Riverstone was left exactly as Emmett had built it, because it had been built to outlast the cottage, and it was not the cottage's turn to be replaced. The small front bedroom was left the way it had been. Meredith slept there. The larger back bedroom was converted, with the help of 2 carpenters from the town, into 3 narrow single beds along one wall, with a bookshelf and a small desk for each one. The room that had been Emmett's study, where the leather armchair still faced the fireplace, became the reading room. The reading glasses were left folded on the arm of the chair. Meredith did not move them. She never would. A small wooden sign went up at the top of the gravel driveway. The Emmett Osterberg House, a place where new beginnings find a home. It opened in April. The first spring passed, then the first summer, then the first fall. Frances Doolittle came on Fridays. She brought bread. She brought butter. She brought casseroles. She sat in the leather armchair some afternoons and knitted, and did not speak, and let the girls who lived there come to her when they were ready to come. Bernadette Halvorsen came on Wednesdays. She brought library books. She sat with any girl who wanted to sit, and she taught them to read the kinds of documents no one had ever taught them to read. Leases, bank statements, voter registration forms, Wisconsin state IDs, insurance policies. The county library became, for a lot of those girls, the second most important building in their lives. Perry Whitmore came the first Sunday of every month. He did the accounts. He signed the papers. He drank 1 cup of coffee. He went home. Dr. Ellis Radford came whenever anyone had a fever. The town got used to seeing young women walking down County Road Q with backpacks. The town did not comment. That was the way of the town. Small nod, small wave, no questions. Whatever you needed, you got. Whatever you did not want to talk about, no one asked. The following October, on an afternoon that smelled the way the afternoon of Meredith's arrival had smelled, cedar and wood smoke and the beginning of frost, the county bus stopped at the mouth of the gravel driveway. A young woman stepped down. She was 18. She had a black backpack over one shoulder. Her jacket was too thin for the weather. Her hands were pushed deep in her pockets. She stood at the top of the driveway, and she did not walk down it. She looked at the cottage. She looked at the stone chimney. She looked at the marigolds on the porch rail, which someone had planted again that year, because Meredith had learned that they were the kind of flower that would still bloom out of season. She did not move. Meredith saw her from the kitchen window. She saw a thin girl standing at the top of a driveway, not walking down it. Meredith set down the dish towel she was holding. She walked out onto the porch. The girl did not look up right away. She was looking at her own boots on the gravel. Meredith walked down the porch steps. She walked up the driveway. Slowly. so that a girl who had spent her whole life bracing for the wrong door would have time to hear her coming. She stopped a few feet away. The girl finally lifted her eyes. She was pale. Her hair was pulled back with a rubber band. She had been crying at some earlier point in the day, and she had wiped her face on her sleeve, and she had not looked in a mirror since. She had that look. Meredith knew that look. Meredith had worn that look for 16 years. The girl's voice barely carried over the wind coming off the lake. I got sent an address. I think this is wrong. I do not have anyone here. Meredith reached out, slowly, so the girl could see her hand coming. She lifted the strap of the black backpack off the girl's shoulder. The backpack was so light. She remembered her own backpack. She remembered exactly how light a whole life could weigh. She held the backpack in her own hand. She looked at the girl, and the words she had waited her whole childhood for someone to say to her came out of her own mouth for the first time. We have been expecting you. The girl's face broke. Not into tears. Something else. Something more careful. The face of a person who had not been expected by anyone in a very long time and was not sure her body remembered how to accept the sentence. The whisper came out very small. I do not have a family. Meredith reached her free hand into the pocket of her flannel shirt. Her fingers closed around the brass pocket watch. She could feel, through the metal, the 6-word engraving her uncle had cut into it 17 years ago, when he was 46 years old and had just been told he could not raise a 4-year-old girl. Until she knows she is loved. She let her hand rest against the watch. She looked at the girl on the driveway. 2 words. Soft. You do now. And she turned, and the girl walked with her, down the gravel drive, past the marigolds still blooming on the porch rail, up the 2 low steps, across the porch, through the front door of the cottage that a man named Emmett Osterberg had spent almost 20 years preparing for the arrival of a girl he was not allowed to raise. The door closed softly behind them both. Out on the lake, a single loon crossed the darkening water, its wake almost invisible, and the last of the October light lay gold across the same shoreline it had lain across for 1,000 Octobers before, and would lie across for as many Octobers to come as the promise Emmett Osterberg had built would hold.